might like. I think what we're seeing is groupthink everywhere around the world. And the great thing about groupthink is it's fine if you're all okay and got it right, but it's really bad if you've got it wrong. So Gordon Brown, who was the prime minister at the time, called me up, I think it was June or July 2008. And he said to me, Danny, you mustn't get disheartened. You keep losing every vote 8-1, but there aren't 9 opinions. There's only 2 opinions, yours and the other 8, and they're all wrong.
Welcome to the Acid Capitalist Show. I am the Alchemist, Chris Sweeney, and today is a very, very special show. I'm actually recording this intro after the show because our guest this week was a force of nature, a man who could not be contained. Even Mr. Hugh Hendry, the acid capitalist, the man who can see around corners, could not put the shackles on him. Hugh, it was a whirlwind of a show, wasn't it? Do you want to let the people know who's coming up?
Yeah, we have Danny, champion of the world. I think of that Roald Dahl book, but obviously I'm referring to Danny Blanchflower, who has many distinctions, a distinguished Labour economist. But the thing where we love him most is he was on the interest rate setting committee of the Bank of England, and he is the only member of a board in a central bank in the world in the last 20 years who actually has any credibility. He's the only one who said, "You're nuts. I disagree with you guys. What are you doing? Don't touch that button. Do not touch that. Oh my God, you just touched that button." So honored to just bathe in the stories and the intellect of the great Danny Blanchflower.
But it seems to me that the Bank of England, the Fed, and everybody else has got themselves thinking one thing in a period that's so uncertain and so unclear and has so little data for us to go on, and we're not out of this supply shock, we're not out of a war in Europe, that actually, if you say things like inflation is permanently going to return to +4, the right question is, but could you rule out the possibility that it returns to -4? And the answer is no. So I think in a sense, what's pretty interesting is both amongst politicians, policymakers, and central bankers, is there is so little dissent. So now what happens is it's really okay to all think the same and be wrong. I think that's where we are.
When have we never been there?
Well, I think the answer to you is that in a way in the past it didn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, think if growth, if you look in the UK, let's say since 1965, there were something like 65 consecutive quarters of growth. So, it's like, okay, next quarter there's going to be growth, right? The time it matters is at turning points, right? Because all you say is everything we've seen in the past just carries on, which is fine as long as it carries on. And then when it doesn't, so what we know about when it doesn't, think about when it turns down, you're always far too optimistic because you think everything's going to continue steadily upwards and it goes down. At upticks, the opposite is true. You think it's going to go down and it really goes up, but nobody cares about that, right? Because it's better than you thought. So I think the answer is that for most of my life, certainly through, let's say, from 1960 through, maybe with the oil shock, but really through 2006 or 7, you could just repeat what happened a year ago.
Yeah,
that was it, right? Yeah. And today you can't repeat what happened 2 months ago.
Well, this is this notion. This is this notion of depression that I may be loose with the figures, but I want to say in the 30 years to 2007, that the compound growth rate in US GDP was 2.7%.
Right.
And ever since, so what is that? The best part of 15 years, right. We have not achieved that profile and probably lost a percentage point a year.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I think in every series that you look at, the Great Recession represents a turning point, right? Let's just go back a second. When I was at the Bank of England, we got a call on Monday morning. I can't remember, it was in 2007, I think. We got a call on Monday morning, which basically said, by a middle day of this week, Northern Rock is going broke, right? So for the first time in 150 years, by Thursday, Northern Rock had gone bust. And so the right question to ask a central banker like me, when people were calling me up, they were saying, is my money safe at Northern Rock? And should I go line up outside the bank? The answer to which was, your money is not safe. And yes, you should line up outside the bank. But a central banker like me, you can't ask that question, because whatever I tell you, if I lie, you're in trouble. And if I say yes, I generate a panic. So I think you're right. I think we saw, so bank runs, bank failures. And the stuff that I've talked about, I'm a labor economist, and the big thing that I've been writing about this week is that the fundamental relations in the labor market stopped working in 2008. So you're right, the GDP stopped. But if you think of this, here's a fundamental relation. If you look at the level of the unemployment rate, you could track it pretty well with wage growth. So as unemployment went down, wage growth went up and so on. Every relationship in the labor market since 2008 has broken. The unemployment rate appears to be uncorrelated with wage growth. So think about what happened, say, in 2012 to 18. The Fed said, we've got to raise rates because the unemployment rate's coming down and wage growth is going to explode. And it never did, and it never did, and it never did, and it never did. But it always had before. It always had from, 1950. So I think you're absolutely right. And then what you have is another shock comes along later. But I look back, there is precedent. Think of this. You had the Great War, followed by a pandemic, followed by the Great Crash. We had a great crash, followed by a pandemic, followed by a European war. So there is some precedent, but nothing else. There's no other data points, I don't think. So I agree with you. Fundamental relations changed. And when people say things to you like, in the past, the Fed did this, or in the past with this relation, this happened, your right answer is to say, not anymore.
Totally.
So this is really the economics of depression, and we
Possibly
need a more fulsome debate. And my concern is that we discovered with the pandemic that there seemed to be unwritten rules with regard to public discourse, that we discovered there were things that you were permitted to discuss and things which you were certainly not permitted to discuss. And I put it to you, I don't know if you've noticed, maybe I'm just paranoid, but
he has got a corkscrew in his hand. I
noticed that. I thought he was going to drive that. I thought he was going to drive that into his stein a minute and start sort of
perfect. But keep going.
Come on, I like to fidget.
No, it's fine.
I would say to you that it's almost as though the term depression has been removed from the modern lexicon. I call it the conceit of modernity, that depression's no longer.
Well, think the first thing that we'll look at the Bank of England. In a sense, the great shock to everybody in the last few days when they did their most recent forecast is they basically said, we're forecasting a recession. We're forecasting actually over the next 3 years, output's going to fall. So, I mean, that's not a word that central banks even like to use. So they don't even like to use the word recession. But if you're forecasting it's actually minus 1.7% growth over the next 3 years, and that's very optimistic, there may be some sense in which that is actually depression. And I mean, it's a really, really bad recession, and it's probably much too optimistic. I mean, I don't know what we would really call a depression. We know it when we see it. We know in the 30s. But remember what got us out of depression in the 30s. In the United States, it was the attack on Pearl Harbor. But in the UK, it was actually rearmament spending from about 37 on, thinking that war was coming. So that we know the way out, right? That's the only way out. And also we go back, there's another word. Let me just go another word to you too. What do we know about depressions too? We know depressions tend to have deflation in them. And for the first time I've ever seen, the Bank of England's forecast last week showed a significant probability within 18 months of deflation. So it's not just depression, right? It's depression. And what do we know about depressions? We know output falls, we know unemployment rises, but we also know that the response to high inflation is deflation. So I agree with you, but I think it's, think of the word depression. Depression means a lot more things. It means output falling, it means unemployment rising, it means actually prices falling. And that's the most normal response to a high period of inflation. And the fact that the Bank of England is forecasting deflation with a significant probability, I agree with you that the word depression has to be on our lips, whether it's, and it's pretty depressing if you look, say, in the UK, where you have two people competing to be, the Prime Minister idiot. I mean, I saw Sunak today put up questions, say, answer the following. So I wrote and said, here's my question to you. What are you going to do when the economy collapses by Christmas? And what's your answer? Oh, we're going to put tax cuts on billionaires. That should fix it.
No, indeed. No, I mean, the debate is depressing. But
yeah,
do you think it's not enough to call it depression the failure after 15 years to retain or regain proximity to the previous era, the rate of growth?
Well, I mean, who's to know whether it's doable or not? But think about it's the same. So the first group of the people who are doing this now are mostly the same people who missed it last time, right? So the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England in September 2008, a day and a half before the failure of Lehman Brothers and 3 weeks before the failure of RBS, had no clue. Same at the Fed. So now the same people are doing the forecasting, saying exactly the same things, doing exactly the same stuff. So it's hardly surprising. I mean, think about the big debate is about you should focus on inflation. Well, actually, go back to 2008. Everybody was focused on inflation, but that wasn't the issue. Inflation was irrelevant because what was the issue was collapsing consumer confidence, collapsing financial sector, banks failing, and the economic models didn't have a financial sector in them. Have economists gone and said, sorry, chaps, we got it all wrong. We're going to work really, really hard so it can never happen again. And the answer is they haven't done any of that. They're making saying and doing exactly the same things. And here's one. I mean, so both on the MPC and at the FOMC, there are no dissenters. Here's something interesting. On the Fed, since Alan Greenspan was there, not a single governor has ever dissented on any decision ever. Well, what use is that? There's no point in having a committee of 12 or a committee of 9. You might as well have a committee of 1 who makes the same mistake. It'd be cheaper. So I think the answer is complacency. The economics is completely hopeless. I think 98% of economics is completely worthless. And so I think we haven't challenged ourselves to go and say, what was the failure last time? How can we prevent it happening this time? And how can we, I mean, the word we kind of want is how can we be nimble? Right, with these huge shocks hitting us, and you came up with the same old crap you came up with last time, which caused 15 years of a break 15 of growth.
Years. Yeah. I mean, I'd say to an unskilled, to a member of to a family member with kind of generically unskilled, whatever, approaching the labor market, that the last 10, 15 years would have been really quite similar to the 1930s. The only difference is that
I agree with that.
We view it through brown.
Well, think of populism, right? I mean, think of populism. What's populism other than a cry for help? It's a cry for help. But I tell you a little story that I like. When I worked on the Mile End Road in the 1980s doing my PhD thesis, and my daughter was born in the Whitechapel Hospital, the London Hospital on Whitechapel Road. And I used to talk there about the well-being of the man on the Clapham omnibus.
Okay.
And I discovered that the son of my supervisor that teach me lives in Clapham. It's quite upmarket. So I've been thinking about and introduced this term, which is I care about the well-being of the woman on the Mile End Road omnibus. Why the Mile End Road? Well, the Mile End Road because it's not an upmarket place. It's the People's Palace was there and so on. But the reason I think it's really interesting is why is it called the Mile End Road? The answer is it starts a mile from Aldgate. So you don't even have to go to Hartlepool or, Sunderland or Alabama. You go 1 mile from the City of London to Whitechapel to Stepney Green. And you see that. And the question is, it's really interesting. So I was asked this morning by BBC journalists this morning, it's all about a wage price spiral. And I said, well, that's for the birds. I literally said to them, so if you look over the last 25 years, to what extent?
It's actually incorrect.
Think of it. Let's think of the woman on the Mile End Road omnibus who's, does some less skilled job, whatever. How has she had anything to do with, caused anything about what's happened in the last 20 years? Nothing. Zero. And the other point I think which is relevant is that, firms and governments have had the ability to pay workers more. They could have done that. Firms decided that they pay the salaries of CEOs and reward shareholders. So if the governor of the Bank of England was to stand up, he could have said, well, chaps, you've done really well over the last 20 years. Give these workers a pay raise and you can just absorb the pay raise, right? There's no reason why you shouldn't do that. So the argument that there's going to be a wage price spiral is for the birds. And what we've seen in the last few, actually today in the UK, biggest decline in real wages that you've ever seen. So how is this likely to be a wage price spiral when workers' living standards have collapsed through the floor? And all they're trying to do is to literally say, well, please, could you just stop my real wages falling? How is that driving what's happened in the economy? So the idea that it's about, but I hope you like my woman on the Mile End Road omnibus, because, it's really that I think, and if you think of populism in Brexit and in Le Pen and Trump and all of that, it's people for some reason who've not been heard. And how is what's happening? How are they being heard? Literally the debate in the UK between Sunak and Truss is nothing to do with the well-being of my lady on the bus. It's nothing to do with them. And then what's going to happen is that she makes £5,000 a year or 6,000, whatever it is, because she's in work and she gets benefits. And she's going to get a bill for £5,000 a year for her to pay her energy. What does she do? Oh, well, the corporation tax is going to come down and the highest marginal rates of taxes are going to come down, but I don't pay taxes. Yeah. So I think we're at what happens in depression is the rich do fine and the poor just disappear. So the last thing, and then the idea that you're going to go to Thatcherism, I posted this picture which says, if you go back to Thatcher, the day she came into office, unemployment was 5.3%. It took 21 years for the unemployment rate to get back to that. 21 years.
I think a lot gets unfairly put at Thatcher. I don't want to kind of go there.
No, but I'm just saying, if you're going to, there's things you can argue. There's arguments you can make about the overly, the country wasn't working, all the rest of it. But let's just get the facts straight.
No. But you're out there, thankfully, as and so you're out there as my least favorite community, the expert. But you're one of the good guys. And
do you know what? I recommend you panic. Absolutely. Let me go with it. Yeah. Let me go with what I say. So I say things like this. So I say, I have this view. I have no idea if I'm right. There's a considerable possibility that I'm wrong. But what I know is that I'm potentially wrong. But what I hear from you is that you think you're right. And I know you're not. You're just, and I have a new phrase for it that you'll like. I call it guessonomics. You're just guessing. I'm just guessing. I'm an expert, but I'm just guessing. I don't know what's going to happen. But you have this great degree of certainty. The governor of the Bank of England says, we're going to have to raise rates 73 times because in 3 years' time, this is what's going to happen. He doesn't know what's going to happen in 3 minutes. So I think as an expert, I just say, well, I don't know, but you don't either. And that's the role that I play, which is I recommend you panic. I'm trying not to because I'm clueless.
Yeah, but your other experts who really are clueless, their risk reward is kind of the same as you, but you've worked it out and you're more transparent and open with it.
Well, I don't know if the rewards are the same as me. I think you go back to 2008. I realized that there were 4 possible outcomes. So here's the 4 possible outcomes. You're right and everybody else is right. That's okay. You're wrong and everybody else is wrong. That's okay. You're right and everybody else is wrong. Well, whoop-de-doo. But the problem is that you could be wrong and everybody else is right? And I sat for a really long time thinking that maybe I'm completely wrong and I'm a goat, right? And then I thought, well, why does it matter? I mean, I'm a tenured professor. I'm just going to say what I think. I'm going to say what I think. And Mervyn did everything he could, briefed against me, arranged meetings that I couldn't get to. It's like, and I used to go, nah, I don't care. I'm just going to say what I think. Because what's the incentive to me? How are you going to bring me down? I just try and tell you what I think. And if I'm an idiot, I'm an idiot.
Yeah. But it's that tenure thing which is the poison. I mean, again, I'm not aiming it at. I mean, you could suffer from it, but that's what kind of got my goat was the pontification.
No, I agree with that. I mean, remember I said 5 minutes ago, 98% of economics is completely worthless. It's about, I call it squiggles on diggles. They're pontificating about things that don't matter. I often say, how does this help anybody in the real world? How does it help my woman on the bus? How does it help any policymaker? I'm coming back to Scotland next year to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the birth of Adam Smith. And Adam Smith basically wrote two things. And the most famous was the first one. So he talked about the job of economics is to try to improve the wealth of nations. But his early stuff talks about the fact is we care about the well-being of others, right? That's what Smith's most probably best stuff is. So this is about trying to improve the wealth of nations. I often say, so how does this paper help to improve the wealth of nations? It's irrelevant. So I got myself into trouble a few times when I said on Twitter, it seemed to me that most economists would be better off delivering pizza. And somebody said to me, that's a really dumb idea because they go to the wrong address. No, I mean, let's, I recommend you panic. I think you've said it very well. I mean, I think in a way you have to have a little bit of courage. I mean, I was briefed against from the Bank of England from the moment I was appointed. Because
can I ask then, how did you get appointed then? If they didn't want you, Danny, was it hard getting appointed?
No, it wasn't actually. Do you know how I got appointed? This is kind of interesting. So Ed Balls, who was the guy who's Gordon Brown's pal, used to be the FT correspondent in Boston a lot. He'd been in Boston, and he used to call me up and say, Danny, can you help me with this? Danny, can you help? So just in the background, I would kind of help him, and I'd help send him things. And so then one day I was somewhere, I can't remember. Oh, I know. I was in Colorado. I was at the Boulders and with my wife, and I get a phone call, and it said, Gordon Brown wants you to go on the NPC. Do you want to do it? And I went, what? Literally, that was literally what happened. I never applied. So
is it a paid job? Is it a paid job, Danny, or is it a voluntary? It's badly paid. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I had to. Well, I'm not going into it, but it was ridiculous. It was. I mean, I couldn't even pay my mortgage with the money, so I had to carry on doing. And Dartmouth gave me leave and all of that stuff. But the reality was that. So after I left, they made it that you had to apply, you had to go to a committee, and nobody could commute as I did every 3 weeks back and forth. So they changed the rules because Gordon just said, I think I'd like Danny to be there, please. So off I went. That's how, and then I got there and they said, are you qualified? And I said, well, I studied cross-country labor markets and financial constraints and banking systems and, looked at data on wages. And I think that might be relevant. And they all went, nah, that's not relevant. And I know a lot about the United States and the UK and Europe and Japan. And they went, nah, that's not relevant. Turns out it kind of was relevant. And a lot of the time I would just say, in NPC meetings for several months, every single thing people said, I put my hand up and I said, well, I think the opposite. I think that's completely wrong. I don't think you have the faintest clue. You have no idea. And so that ended up, I was like, how do you spell pariah?
So how do you vote in the NPC? I mean, I don't know if it's a weird question. Do you put your hand up in the air? Do you do it? Do you sit in a room?
Yeah, you sit in a room and it starts out with one of them, well, in my day, the deputy governor in charge of monetary policy, and then it would go around the room. picked by the governor. But one day I was the fourth vote, and 4 people voted for no change, and I was the 4th person who voted for it. And then 5 people after me voted for a rate increase. So I was always very mindful. And then one occasion, 4 people in front of me, I was the 5th vote, 4 people in front of me voted for 25 basis points of cuts. And I was going to vote for 50. But I didn't trust the system at all. So imagine I vote for 50, there's 425, 4 people vote for no change, and the governor goes, I vote, and so I thought, okay, and I voted for 25 just because I was the 5th vote. So, but once you're at the 5th vote, you know that everybody after you is kind of irrelevant. But there was one occasion, which was in November 2008, where I went to the governor and I said, it's over. We're gonna cut by 150 basis points. And that was, and I think if I recall, I was the 5th vote, and the market thought we were going to cut by 50, and we cut by 150. I always remember it, and I went down the corridor going, yes, 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 but
too late.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, the other thing, actually, Hugh, which is really great. People argued then when people said, "Oh, Danny got ahead of it." They said, "Oh, it would never have mattered." So think of your too late thing. I mean, imagine you got it by February, say, of 08, which is what you should have done. And they said, oh, well, you wouldn't have mattered anyway. Well, of course it would have mattered. Of course it would have mattered if you'd have seen the bloody thing. Of course it would have. And of course, none of them apologized for not seeing it. None of them said it would have made any difference. And they all say, well, Danny, you didn't really see it. Okay.
Mm. Right, sorry. Danny, shush. This is Danny versus Danny, okay? And this show's all about me. I'm kidding on.
Absolutely, go for it.
Right, so a couple of things I want to put to. So I'm with you, and you're on the show because you're one of those rare voices like that gets lost in the din of conformity, okay? And as you say, the group has seized upon this notion of inflation, and it has to be checked. And you're out there against it. Great. And so we will have to find a little, and probably this is the moment to find it in the show. And I'm not the best one. Really hard for me to play devil's advocate. But there will be a heck of a lot of people saying, we've seen prices accelerate by the rate of, let's call it 10% year over year, 10 to 12%. Now I know the answers to this. I'm just setting you up. But we've got to deconstruct it. What should the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve be doing with the incoming data that it's receiving? And it hurts me to ask you that, but you give us some logical response.
Well, I've always fought. There's a pal of mine called Ed Yardini, and he and I have fought for years and years and years. He produces great data. And yesterday he surprised me as a column in the FT saying we've already reached neutral. I think maybe that's true, and rate rises shouldn't come. But I think what's basically happened is that the central banks have got themselves confused as to why this inflation has come about. They overcooked it in the sense that the markets then interpreted as if they knew what they were doing, and really that rates were going to go to 5 or 6 or some nonsense. And that by doing that, there was going to be a soft landing. So I think that was a great part of it. But I think my view is I would have literally at the last MPC meeting, probably the one before, I would have probably voted for a cut. Not so much that I felt that there was a cut, but at least that plausibly not doing anything was just about as plausible. So I think probably the situation we're in right now is waiting and watching and looking. We've seen the things start to turn. We've seen inflation coming down. We've seen the labour market today in the UK looks like it's suddenly on a turn to a 0.2 drop in the employment rate, 0.2 rise in the inactivity rate, big drop in real wages. So I think the answer is that waiting and watching is a pretty big, sensible thing to do, and see what happens as the data comes in. Unclear to me that raising rates now with the quantitative tightening that's going on, that probably looks to be appropriate. But I'm very struck, and I'm happy to try and share this with you. I'm very struck by the Bank of England has the world's greatest chart, which is they have data on annual inflation since the year 1210. 1210. And basically what it shows, we said this a little minute ago, but it shows that the most likely response to an inflation of this kind is that we'll overshoot, and we'll overshoot on the side of deflation, that prices will start to tumble dramatically. The thing that worries me, Hugh, more than anything, and I've written several papers on this, is the collapse in consumer confidence. And the collapse in consumer confidence in Japan, in China, in the UK, in Germany. The logic to me is I've done the analysis, and basically that collapse predicts 6 of the last 6 recessions in the US. Yeah. Now, obviously, there are nuances saying that may not be true because the labor market's better and so on. But basically, it seems to me that if the consumer is scared senseless, and scared by this big rise in inflation, what's the response that people are going to do? And talk of the central banks has scared them more. And so if the price of a chair, the chair I'm sitting in, I was going to buy a new one, it was $1,000, and now it's $2,000. Well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to just hunker down, buy nothing, worry about what's coming. Yeah.
You're going to panic.
And panic. Exactly right. And so I think what the central banks have done, the governor of the Bank of England especially, has scared people senseless. And then that's basically caused the recession. And the recessions are worse. So the evidence of recessions is they're much worse than inflation. So I have some various papers showing that a 1 percentage point rise in unemployment is 5 to 10 times worse than a 1 percentage point rise in inflation. If you can generate a soft landing, lucky you. But chances are you won't. So my view would be waiting and watching and being cautious that what you created is the mother of all recessions. And Hugh could be right that it's a depression.
But if they have all this data and everything's going on, then why did the people in charge get things so wrong? Because I'm a layman here, right? So, you guys can see it. How come they have so many dissenting voices?
You go. I'll go as well, but it's Hugh.
Because they're blind bats. I tell you why, because
he's got it perfect.
There is no penalty for being wrong. When I was
completely.
When I was on Money, BBC, what's it called, with Paxo, and I was on with Jeffrey Sachs and the Nobel Prize crew, and the BBC are terrified of these people. They have no idea what they talk about, and they're kind of bishops, cardinals, even the Pope. Correct. And they go without contest.
Correct.
And I said to Sachs, because Sachs says, "Oh, you filthy speculators, this Greece thing is something you just invented." And I think we were talking the end of March, April. I said, "Hey, listen," and I was with Gillian Tett from the FT, and I said, "I don't know what you were doing like in February or January, right? Probably skiing, why not? You're a tenured professor and stuff. But me, right, if you go back to the December, I wrote a paper on this, published it to my clients about there had been, if you remember, in December 2008, a Greek kid had been killed in a demonstration that got out of hand. And it was just lighting up. And you could kind of put 2 and 2 together. And I said, the difference between you and me, Jeffrey, is if I'm wrong, I might be odious. I might be in your face. I hope I am.
Yeah, of course.
If I'm wrong, I get yanked out. I get taken outside.
Do you know what I call it? It's the same thing. So if you look at what I've written about, I call it the economics of walking about, right? But that's what you're talking about. It's like I'm trying to understand what firms are saying, what markets are doing, what's happening in the streets. Are people saying, what are they actually doing? So go back to the consumer confidence stuff. Talk to people, look at what's happening in the world and observe it and think about, try and forecast from that. It's not about ideology. What you're doing is you're looking at the data and you're trying to work out what's going on. That's what market people do. That's the difference between most economists and what I do and what you do, in the sense that, I watch things all the time. I watch every day what's happening. And most economists won't come on a program like yours because you're going to ask them a question about what happened on Thursday or what's coming. And the answer is what they want to do is they want to prognosticate, because they don't want to answer the question. Absolutely. They want to say, but the real world, right? But they don't want to focus on the fact that there are fundamental relations that change all the time. And it may well be that the markets know it, And it may well be that certain firms know it. Think about Brexit. I mean, how are you going to work out what's going on with Brexit? Well, I listened to a guy today who was interviewed on LBC saying, we employ 1,000 people. We've got 20 plants, and basically we're going to move to the Netherlands because we've had a 200% increase in our energy bill and we can't pay it. Well, that seems to me, that was from this morning. That seems to me to be relevant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so the answer is, I think what Hugh's talked about and what has made me different is I've learned to try and, I mean, what Hugh talked about, he'd written a thing about what was happening on the ground on Thursday, right? That's what you do. It seems to me, if you think, I wrote a column for the Standard the other day, which said to me which I said that the worry for Sunak and Truss is that the markets will get you. The markets stop you doing stupid stuff. You can prognosticate and say, you can use Patrick Minford or some other clown, but the answer is that guys like Hugh will see through you, and the markets will move. And now there's famous story of Dennis Healy left Downing Street, got to Heathrow Airport, and the market had moved. You had to drive back. Well, 3 hours is a long time in economics, right? I mean, that's your view. I think that's your point and mine.
Well, the very worst, and Chris will vouch for this, are the populist economists. What's the chap? You see, Varicus Veins, the guy who was...
Oh, yeah, the Greek guy, the Greek
minister.
guy.
Yeah, Yanis Sarkis or something.
Yeah. So he's on the circuit, but will he come up against me?
No, he's refused
bloody way.
He's refused to
come against you in a heartbeat. I'd love to go with you. You and I would go at it because we think the same. We may disagree, but we'll disagree because we're trying to understand what's going on, right?
Yeah, but see, the thing I find odd is that people like you, for example, 2008, we all know he made a lot of money, or people like that. I find it odd. Maybe I'm just a bit naive to what you guys are saying, but I find it odd why people don't take notice of people like that clearly have taken a position, achieved well, financially benefited. But they clearly understand that. Why would you ignore them, or why would you discount them?
The answer is both Hugh and I. That people don't want to come on with us. Because we're going to try and tear the house down. I'm going to say, how do you know that? You're just making it up. There's no basis for you saying that whatsoever. You're just being pompous. Where's any evidence in the world to back that up? And you're going to much say the same thing from a slightly different standpoint. But we're going to say, but the world has changed. All those patterns you've talked about are just not true. The world's a complicated place. And we're trying to understand and be nimble. And you want us to think how impressed you are because you know what they used to say to me? I'd be on the NPC all the time. You're like this. They used to say to me, when I was at Oxford and when I was at Kent, they said to me all the time, and I was the only person on the committee who hadn't been to Oxford. And I always used to say, and you can cross any word you like, I always would start my sentence by saying, when I was in Bognor. Not that I've ever been to Bognor, but it sounded, it's got the word bog in it. Bognor. Right. When I was in Bognor, I used to study.
And I thought you had been to Bognor. I'm gutted.
My grandma used to.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah.
Is that Wales?
It's
Bognor in Wales. Where is it? Excuse my ignorance.
No.
Where is Bognor?
It's on the south coast near Littlehampton.
Oh, okay.
There's Butlins at Bognor, but it's just a great name. When I was at Bognor.
I don't think it translates across the Atlantic. Danny, can I ask you the cutting interest rates, I even with all my sympathies for you, I tell you why you push me back a bit on that, because here's my theory that 2009, going to bore people because I keep saying this, Citigroup was trading at $9, which was the price that prevailed in 1977, right? Which was 40 years prior. And 9 was actually an overstatement because it was bankrupt. It should be trading at 0.
Sure.
And so the Fed at that point had to decide, was it the 30s redux, and the equity prices or risk prices were set binary. They were set to go to 0. Mm-hmm. And would it allow that? Now, it chose not to. It chose to break the tradition.
In the UK, they chose to allow the price of Northern Rock to go to 0.
Yeah, they did.
They did.
Yeah. And then they regretted that. And history would have told them they'd have regretted it. But what I want to say to you is, by effectively underwriting risk, which I think they had to do, they got there in a very torturous and circuitous and a damaging manner, but they got there. But it's not the central bank that underwrites the market. It's every citizen of the country that underwrites risk. And what it revealed is a fracture, because you have the franchise citizen that is an asset owner, and that decision has been remarkably beneficial, that underwriting exercise. It's expensive, and it's periodically being conducted every 3, 4, 5 years, okay? But it's being conducted at the same time by the disenfranchised, by those who don't have assets. And so when I hear you say you would cut rates, and for sure the equity market would go, I don't know for how long, but the Pavlovian response would be higher, and it would be the inflation and why you have to be in inflation protected real assets, etc. So how do you stop us sliding into a really awful place without having to again beat up the disenfranchised community, which will bring down society?
I agree. I mean, I voted for £250 billion of QE on the basis that, it was, you wanted to encourage people to start to take risks. You had to, yet the models was telling you that interest rates should really have been -4, right? So you were having to do that. But I think the way you said it was not independent of the other body acting in the market. I mean, what eventually you see from 2010 on is fiscal policy tightening like crazy. And so the reason the central bank is stuck in a position that it can't raise rates is that the fiscal authorities are basically tightening. So your tightening the world has become a central bank world. I think a bit more, Hugh, something I've thought about quite a lot. Think about once you put the world on the central bank, it's worse even than the way you said it, because at least the fiscal authorities could have a regional policy, right? They could decide, I'm going to do something to Huddersfield. But the problem with the central bank is that one interest rate fits all, but it's too high, whatever it is. If it's 0, it's too high in Huddersfield and it's too low in London. In a sense, the fear that I have, certainly in the UK, and perhaps also in the United States, is that when the potential recession, depression comes, the fiscal authorities are not going to be in the position that they were in 2009. I mean, Gordon Brown organized, in a sense, go back to your point. Yes, all the things you say are true. Clearly, if you vote to raise the price of assets, then you buy MBSs, that raises the price of houses. That helps those people who own them. But there's another group who could actually do something about everybody else, and they chose not to, right? They chose to keep the wages down. They're going to do the same. And the problem seems to me, let me just say my last point. The problem seems to me that even this time around, unlike in 2008 when we could cut from 500 to a half, we haven't got any room to cut. Maybe just get in early. So Mervyn King goes on desert island discs, right? And they call me up and they say, he's going to go on desert island. Okay. So off he goes. It's the most pompous thing you've ever heard. And about 3/4 of the way through, and you can listen to it, about 3/4 of the way through, they say, but you do have your critics. And he gulps. And they say, well, David Blanchflower says that one of the great things that we should expect from a central bank governor is that you should have some foresight. And he accuses you of not having any. And he spends the next 10 minutes arguing that you shouldn't expect the governor of the Bank of England to have any foresight. So I responded by saying, so therefore next time around we'll save all kinds of money and we'll put a squirrel in there. Because they don't have any foresight either. Literally, it's not even that I lied. It was that you can't expect me to have any foresight. Well, you're the governor of the Bank of England.
But is there an argument that this is one thing I find very interesting is that people in the public sector, see the Bank of England, the governor of the Federal Reserve, all these people, they're paid relatively less than people in the private sector. Quite a lot less.
No, well, that's certainly true at the Fed, but they do fine afterwards. There's a great story at the Fed. Well, I don't understand this, but apparently when Bernanke's about to leave the Fed and he tries to get a mortgage to buy an apartment or something, and they turn him down because he hasn't got an established record of making more than $200,000 a year or something, which makes no sense. He's going out and making speeches at $3 million a kick. I mean, so that is true. I mean, so in the Fed, you're making I had a story where some bank presidents who were making $450 were asked, would you become a governor? And they say, well, why would I take a job where I'm paid $450 to take a job as a governor where I'm paid $210?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But are we attracting a lower less of candidate? If we paid them more, would we get people who have got more?
Well, I mean, so what happens in general when you have academics, someone like me, who will come for 3 years, the university protects you, pays you salary, does stuff, and you come and you do it's public service. But you can't. You have to. If you're a market guy, you can't come in. You can't trade. You've got all sorts of things. So what happens is that the problem in lots of ways is that the quality of the people is very low.
But that's what I'm saying. If we up the salary, wouldn't we get people that were of a higher quality? They would say, right, someone like, I don't know, say in Hugh's world, if we paid them $2 million a year and say, right, you come and do it. But if you think,
but what's happened? So I think the director of the FBI, who makes, let's say he makes $220, he made $7 million previous year. So you can. Well, it ends up you can take rich people who will do this. Janet Yellen was governor of the Fed. Now she's Treasury Secretary, but she made, I don't know, $20 million in the 18 months between the two jobs, so she can afford to take a job as Treasury Secretary.
She made a lot of money. She was private before coming to the Fed, no?
No, she wasn't. Janet was...
Powell.
Yeah, same thing, J-Powell. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Sunak's going to be the richest ever politician in Britain, is he not? He is the richest politician we've ever seen in Britain. They say Sunak's wealth is because his wife together. Yeah,
but I think if you pay, the sad story is you pay, I want the organ grinder, not, and you pay peanut, all of that stuff. So I think the quality of the people making these kinds of decisions has been very low. A lot of it's that. And the quality of the argument is very poor.
Annie, we need the Alchemist. We call Chris the Alchemist. Yeah. We need Chris as the governor of the Bank of England. We need Joe Rogan, the governor of the Fed, governor of the Reserve Bank, because we need people who are not sure that they know what they're doing. Yeah,
I'll take that as a compliment.
No, that's right. And I think my great strength is that, I know oftentimes I'm the person in the room who knows the most, but I know I don't know anything, right? And that's a great strength. That often is a great strength. You just, you don't know much.
Yeah.
And
also, because I believe that, this inflation is a monetary phenomenon, I buy that. I also think it's a psychological kind of, and so again, when Volcker said, I lied to you, but the good news is I'm going to do something about it this time. And actually the bad news is that means I'm going to raise interest rates in the biggest recession ever. But it's kind of like central banking, I want to say, is effectively a game of poker between the center and the private banks. And you think of those pictures, all the dogs playing poker. That's how I conceive it. And if you think of Volcker, all of the banks in the 70s, they all knew they were lying about inflation. And a private bank can effectively choose to allocate between lending to the government, buying treasuries, or lending to mom and pops in the real world. The latter has inflation protection embedded in it because you can raise your rates, less so with the treasuries. And when Volcker comes in, for sure they knew the Fed was lying, and their allocation to treasuries is enormous. It's the opposite. The allocation to loans is enormous because that's their inflation protection. And Volcker then has to say to them, I'm crazy. I'm going to raise interest rates in the deepest post-war recession ever. And you're going to sit there with, yes, you've got real inflation protection, but the credit risk, I'm going to destroy you on the credit risk. Yeah, and it took several rate hikes, but the banks then went fold, and as the allocation shifted from one extreme to the other.
But you see, in a sense, what you talked about is, at least in some sense, he had some credibility. I don't think these central bankers have any credibility at all. They have none. They missed the Great Recession. And they never told anybody. No one went to jail. At least in Iceland, right? In Iceland. What was the famous story in Iceland? Did you ever see the famous pictures? So in Iceland, the bank's failing, and they show a picture at the airport, and there's 50 Lexuses parked on the parked on the, around the airport. You're like, what are those 50 Lexuses? Guy got in his Lexus, drove to the airport, went, get me on the next plane out, and left his Lexus on, right? I mean, that was real accountability.
I have to keep a low profile in Iceland. Chris might
explain. Yeah. Okay, we don't go there.
Yeah.
Hey, how are we nearly done here? I got to run.
No, Hugh was given death threats, wasn't he? Hugh was given death threats in Iceland. But I got to say,
you're really, oh God. Well,
but
credibility seems to me, if you stand up and say, I think what the central bank should have done is say this. They said, okay, we're in a world where we don't really understand. Here's 5 possible scenarios that could come. COVID could be done and it's fine. COVID could explode. Here's 5 scenarios. We're really in a hugely uncertain world. We don't know which one of these is coming, but we're going to be prepared for each of them. And this is what we would do here. This is what we do there. And you say, well, which are you forecasting? You say, I don't know. We're in a world I really don't know. And we have a set of possibilities that we will respond to and adapt to. Rest assured, we're watching the data. We're watching how things are proceeding, and we'll do our best depending on which of these scenarios that we're in. What they said was, we know what's coming and this is what we need to do. But then how did you forecast? Did you forecast what was going to happen to COVID? And did you forecast a war? No and no. So their credibility is shot because they pretended they knew which of the scenarios was coming.
Yeah.
Danny, thank you so much. What an
conversation.
And you're on the BBC tonight. It's just a shame you hasn't.
I don't know whether
those,
I'm going to say you guys don't know what you're talking about.
Well, if you'd got that, I recommend you panic hat over to you. You could have just put that on the BBC tonight. Yeah. Well, you've got the phrase. I recommend you panic. You've got the phrase ready for them. You know what I mean?
Wonderfully sad, but yeah.
We'll see. But what do you think, Hugh, of the? You should not expect the governor of the Bank of England to have any foresight.
My favorite thing about that is, as a central banker, you may run to desert island, but you can never hide from the storm of Danny Blanchflower. That's what I like about that.
Well, he won't ever go on anything where I am. Bye.
See you, Danny. Lovely to meet you. And I think the one phrase that sums up this week's show is, we all suggest that you panic.
Indeed. But as you panic, may I suggest that you rate and you review the show on the Apple podcast. So that, again, because listen, if you've just sat through the storm, which is upon us and is only going to get worse, and you're thinking of solutions, the solutions are so far off. The solutions will begin as we can multiply our order. The solutions begin when we are in society and we're saying we're subversive. We reject this idiotic economic system, right? Get rid of central banks. Panic.
But that part of the economic system, do get out your credit cards and your debit cards and your American Express cards, and you want to go online and you want to buy a baseball cap from the Acid Capitalist, because there was I don't know if we've got time to go through it today, but there was a fashion write-up going around about your hats. Acidcap.com, I'm told that's the place to go for them. That's where is that correct, Hugh? Is that the place to go for your hats?
Indeed, go on profile pages, you'll find it. Listen, we're never reassured, never knowingly undersold, and all you whingers, really.
The review even said the markup to do with like the mystique of the brand is on the same level as Hermes. Have I said that right? Hermes, is that right?
And Hermes is an 8. It is an H. I see people wearing these Hermes belts, and I'm like, why have they got my name on the belt?
Yeah,
I don't know.
But yeah, there was a big thing. They were pretty into your hats. Even the fashion person when they walked around. So yeah. So yeah, pretty impressive people. So get on there, and that's the one good saving grace of this current economy we're in. Your credit card and debit card. You go online, you can buy one of those hats, and like you say, like it says on the tin, panic.
Yeah, if someone stops you in the street, what's the story about the hat? The story in the hat is the malaise of the economy. We're in a depression. And by wearing this hat, you're saying to your fellow citizens, let's burn their damn houses down. Let's get rid of the Federal Reserve. Let's get rid of the Bank of England. Let's get rid of the ECB that raised interest rates in July 2008. I condemn them. Wear the hat, people. Thank you very much.